Conversations across time, conversations across time, conversations across time, conversations across time, conversations across time.
Hi, I'm Mark Hoffman, proud member of the Conversations Across Time team and a retired history teacher. Tonight's show I protect Ulysses S. Grant, President of the United States from 1869 to 1877 during the critical period of Reconstruction. I also was the 8th president of the National Rifle Association. As you will see, that becomes important. Also on the panel this evening are the show's hosts, attorney Vivienne Crawford and attorney Irv Madnick, who was involved in many cases that involve gun violence. During the show this evening, the panel will discuss the bastardization of the Second Amendment and how the original charter of the National Rifle Association has also been bastardized to make sure that every American thinks that it's all right to own guns. We will discuss how money, lobbying, political action committees, propaganda, and racism influence people's perception of gun ownership and the critical problem of mass shootings in the United States of America. Stay tuned for a very provocative and educational show. The situation is critical. In this country, it is easier to buy an AR-15 assault weapon than this stogie I hold in my hand. Enjoy the show.
Good evening. Welcome to the third episode in a series that we are calling the NRA and the Bastardization of the Second Amendment. When we left you last week, we left you with a statistic, and I want to put that up again. America's gun homicide rate is more than 25 times the average of other developed countries. And we asked when we left that you should give that some thought. And there's some other numbers that I want to share with you. We've been talking about this. 91% of children under 15 killed by guns worldwide have lived in the United States. So let me make that clearer. Of all of the statistics citing young people under 15 being killed by guns, 91% of those children were residents of the United States.
That's incredible. That's incredible. That means let's say in 1,000 gun deaths of children under 15 worldwide, 910 would be citizens of the United States. That boggles my mind. That absolutely boggles my mind that your legislature and your president can't do anything about it.
Does it boggle your mind in light of Sandy Hook?
Yes.
Because we again thought Sandy Hook was a watershed moment.
Yeah, I mean, I thought there were a lot of watershed moments, but there are none. I mean, the resistance to do good is just incredible to me. I mean, and listen, I thought I lived through tumultuous times. I'm old enough, you know, to live through the assassination of Kennedy. We talked about that. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, riots, the Vietnam War. Remember, we talked about that. We had long discussions about the Vietnam War and the civil strife that created. And people were at each other's throats. People were killing people on the streets. There were riots in all the major cities in this country in relation to all those things. And yet, out of that came the Voting Rights Act and, you know, LBJ and the Civil Rights Act. And
war against poverty.
And even though we did have Iraq, which was, you know, generally considered to be a mistake, we still didn't have the type of evil and violence that had really in my 20s and 30s that I saw on a regular and daily basis. And yet today, in the face of this carnage, where almost on a monthly basis there's a mass killing always by assault rifles. I mean, we know what they are, these AK, whatever they are, 51
by a
and 47.
citizen, by a citizen of the United
By a
States.
citizen of the United States, no terroristic immigrant who came here to kill people. By a citizen of the United States, whether he had mental issues or had other issues, racial issues or mental issues, makes no difference. There's a lot of issues. But the main ingredient, the common denominator, is the assault weapon. Why in the world can somebody walk into and why does a gun store have the right to sell an assault weapon to some guy or woman that walks in there and wants to buy it? Just because they can identify themselves and prove that perhaps they hadn't been involved in any crime in the past. It is mind-boggling to me, and I think it's mind-boggling to most of the people in this country. I think I threw out 80% before. It could be more, maybe it's a little less, but most of the people.
So,
this country is built on what we call democracy, which means that people are really the determinators of our policy.
So, Mr. Madnick,
and yet that's been usurped by money, by the lobbying interests that overcome the people's will for their own interests. A lot of time it's self-interest or group interest, and that's disgusting to me.
well, Mr. Madnick, well, you're really not only indicting the NRA and the bastardization of Second Amendment, you're indicting our very democratic system.
I am indicting the Democrats. And by the way, I'm not indicting Republicans
No, I know that.
or Democrats. I'm indicting them both.
You're indicting
because they've allowed this system to get worse and worse and worse. And the policies, look, they're going to pass, or they're going to try and pass now, a tax reform bill. They couldn't repeal and replace Obamacare because the bills that they came up with to replace it were so evil and mean that 15% of the people approved of it, and they were really concerned about that. Well, they're going to come up with a tax reform bill. And I think that, again, everybody in this country says, well, tax reform, that doesn't sound like a bad idea. Taxes are so complicated. Even a regular working person has to fill out a 10-page form, you know, to file his taxes. It sounds like a real good idea. But over the years, what's happened is, and the reason there's 10-page forms, is because the interests of the corporations and people with a lot of money have bastardized the income, the IRS, so that they were allowed to take deductions that normal people couldn't take. And that's what's created this tremendous morass in the Internal Revenue System. So now they're going to try and change that. Well, wait till you see what happens. Wait till you see, and we haven't reached that point yet. All of these special interests that have lobbying interests in Washington is going to be a perfect example of what we're talking about. We're going to come in to protect all of those things that have been in this Internal Revenue System for years, and it's not going to be an easy thing to get tax reform. And the kind of tax reform they want anyway is to benefit only the large, 90% of it is to benefit the large corporations and people that earn millions of dollars and are worth millions of dollars, like the president himself. This bill would automatically have meant, the only tax return that we've seen from this president is a tax return from like 2007. And he had to pay that year $31 billion in the alternative minimum tax, which is a part of the Internal Revenue Service that charges people to pay taxes, even though they were able to take all these other, even though they made millions and millions of dollars and took all these deductions from all these other various things that they've lobbied for years, still made them pay some tax. He would have saved personally $31 billion. He wants to overturn the estate tax. The estate tax represents, first of all, there's no estate tax today if your estate is not worth over $5 million.
Exactly.
And a portion of 1% of the people in this country, and of course the wealthiest people in the country, pay that estate tax. So who does that benefit? Does that benefit me? Does that benefit, doesn't benefit, I wish it did benefit me, it doesn't benefit me. Because I don't have that kind of money to leave. And most people, 99.9% of the people don't have that kind. So they're coming up with another mean bill, like that bill that they had to repair and replace Obamacare. And they're going to run into the same problem. And if the Democrats did it, it would be the same issue and the same situation.
The same issue that you're speaking about, Mr. Madnick, is the same issue that we're having with gun control.
Why we can't
How-
do anything about
why-
gun control.
right,
Absolutely.
So
it permeates
what-
every aspect of our society, every negative aspect of our society.
yeah, when I was president, we had the same problem. I mean, the influence of the newly established oil industry, and of course,
Yes.
during my administration, the railroads were all powerful. So I would say the railroads were equal in power when I was president to what you have in terms of hedge funds and NRA today.
Trusts, all
so
the trusts in this
if,
country.
if it's been over 140 years since I've been president, how can the citizens who are watching this show and the current residents of this great nation change things?
Well, what happened was, in your time, all these tremendous trusts were created
Right.
by all the robber barons, Rockefellers, and whoever, and created all these trusts, and it eventually led to antitrust legislation that broke up those trusts to a certain extent. It also, and by the way, up until the early 1900s, there was no income tax. And it created the income tax law, and it was a graduated tax so that people who made more money would pay
except
more.
for a short period of time, and that was at the end of the Civil War. We did have an income tax. But you are
Okay,
correct.
but-
The
yeah.
graduated
Right.
income tax.
So there, you say, well, is there any hope? Yeah, there's hope. It's happened before, and I think it can happen again. I mean, I like to look at, and we had this discussion a couple of times.
The glass.
The other panelists were always half, you know, whether the
Half
glass
drunk
was
like
half
I
empty
was
or half
accused
full.
of.
And I always looked at it as half full. I have, you know, I do even in these tumultuous times, I do think that
But
we can overcome them. And,
Well, so-
and again, get back to this thing, and I know I harp on this all the time, but the most important thing, if you don't like something in this country, some political, you vote.
you have to vote.
You have to
What,
vote.
what would happen, this is just a proposition, if all the concerned citizens joined the NRA, and then when they had their meetings,
Okay.
vote someone, well, I'm
Vote
just
for
throwing
another-
that.
Well, I would say that you know what?
New
I don't think
leadership.
it matters.
Oh, okay.
Because as long as the
ILA.
lobbying arm of the NRA
Yes.
is using that money to lobby the legislator. By the way, that's if you poll the NRA, I'm sure a majority of the NRA would be against the legalization of assault weapons. They would be for banning them. I really believe that. But not the lobbying committee, because they don't want to have any infringement whatsoever
But-
on what they believe to be a
Well,
right
why you
that
say
they
that-
get from the Second
When
Amendment.
my old organization sends out the magazine, they tell the members who to vote for. Just like, you know, when
Oh, they
your
do. But
labor
But they don't all
union.
have
Yeah,
to follow
but
it.
people
But
don't
they
follow.
do it, Brown, because they just say, this is what my, you know, the most important thing to me.
A lot of people do, and a lot of people don't.
I mean, what did your President Obama say about, you know, the people in rural America? That's all they want.
Runs in their religion,
and that's
sure.
their religion. So if that's the most important thing to them, they're going to vote whatever the organization tells them, and that's why these politicians are prisoner of the organization. You could, in rural America or even suburban America, you cannot today win an election if you are bucked by the NRA.
Well, I think even the Democrats said last time, said, we're not going to take your guns away. That's not what we're going to do. Because that's what the Republicans said. They're going to come in and take your guns away like they did in Australia. And they said, we're not looking to take your guns away.
But they should take their guns away.
Well,
they should
we
say
know that, but they're not. It's almost an impossible thing.
Right.
You can't do.
You got to do it,
things
but
that
you got to
are
do a baby step.
You
I got
have to
you.
do what's possible.
Yeah, you got to do.
All we want to do is make
Assault weapons.
sensible regulations on the gun policy, things that almost everybody would agree on, and that's what they said. Now, when they threw their ads out, you know, the 30-second bids, they're taking your guns away. They're taking your guns away, and that's all those people see, and that's how they vote. But that's not what they wanted. And what's going to have to happen somewhere down the road, there's going to have to be, and it's not going to be in the near future, obviously, because the Supreme Court's sort of packed, but it can change quickly. The Supreme Court has to reverse Heller and go back to the classical, true meaning of the Second Amendment, which was in Miller back in '39. And there's plenty of precedent to do that, and hopefully that'll come someday. and there'll be a change, a paradigm change in gun ownership, gun regulation, and hopefully that'll be it. But in the meantime, what's going to happen are more kids, more innocent people, more people in churches, soft targets, churches, schools are going to get slaughtered. And it's on those people who refuse to vote against the banning of these type weapons.
Now, the interesting thing, you know, with the NRA's argument is always that the way that you stop someone like that is with more guns. But in
a good person can always stop a bad person.
Oh,
a good person with a gun will stop a bad person. Didn't happen in Texas. Didn't happen in Vegas.
Did not, and that's what I was going to say, because the way that was set up in Vegas, this shooter strategically placed himself over a concert venue. Those people were sitting ducks for him. Same thing with yesterday with Sutherland in Sutherland Springs. This man came into the church with his weapon drawn. The people sitting in the pews, they weren't expecting, and even if they had a gun, he was still going to mow down a number of people. Well, he would have killed more.
Didn't he have a bulletproof vest?
Yes,
yeah,
it was a
yeah, he had armor
gear.
on. He was wearing black and had armor. But the Vegas, this guy's crazy. I mean, he has a history of mental illness.
Yes.
The kid who shot up those kids at Sandy Hook, he had a history of mental illness. So that was part of it, and it's understandable. Still, guns were the assault weapon was the common denominator. But in Vegas, there was no indication that this guy was a kookaboo. As a matter of fact, this guy was supposedly a millionaire who was winning millions of dollars in the casinos. He had a legitimate woman that he was with. The woman he lived with said he wasn't nuts. His brother said he wasn't crazy. Nobody knows why he did it. But he had the wherewithal to do it. That's the common denominator. You can say they're crazy, they're racist, they're terrorists, they're whatever, but the common denominator in every one of those situations is an assault weapon.
So at the very minimum, Congress should pass a law that would ban assault weapons
and allow for the confiscation of assault weapons and people's
the ones that they're already owned.
A law that would require mental health checks before to buy any type of gun.
Absolutely. Listen, what's happened today with the mental health laws in this country, I know when I was younger, they had these mental hospitals. They had Byberry here and whatever. And people who really had serious mental health issues, they were institutionalized. And that was deemed to be a violation of their civil rights and due process. And they closed all those places. So as a consequence, you have all these kookaboos and nutcases out on the street. I mean, these homeless people with mental health issues, and a lot of them are not on the street, and they're in homes and people's homes, and they do crazy things, and they're not being treated. But if they have had treatment, if there's any indication that there's an issue, there should be a national log so that everybody knows who it is that's had any kind of mental health treatment, and they should be barred from having a weapon.
Conversations across time, conversations across time, conversations across time, conversations across time.